Gideon show for the last, I want to say 5 years, and talked to Brother Gideon and talked to the elders. So I want to introduce them because we're going to deal with a topic that I've always warned the Hebrew Israelites about. So Gideon, introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. Thank you once again, being a king,
Right.
sitting before the king of the atheists, for allowing me to be on and seeing you develop into a fine young man in audio, television, cable, internet,
All right.
revolutionary, all that.
All right.
Yes,
right.
sir.
To his right, we got the Prince. How you doing, Prince?
No, my brother, I'm glad to see you progressing and moving ahead.
Okay. Both of you elders, I have told y'all time and time again. Let's just start with Egypt.
Okay.
Hosni Mubarak, the first ruler, Egypt was a secular country, meaning most kind of like ours, with a democratic society, meaning they were not ruled by Sharia law. Now, that government was overthrown, and so, it was replaced by Muhammad Morsi. Muhammad Morsi was elected by the Muslim Brotherhood, and I guess everything was going fine until they wanted to all of a sudden implement Sharia law. You even had Muslims saying, we don't want that in our government. Now, y'all being Hebrews, we've talked about theocracies. We've talked about the Bible as being a source into the government.
Sure.
But I've warned y'all that is not, we're seeing today in Egypt that's not working. So y'all, I want to hear y'all wisdom today because I know we've talked about this time and time again, and now we're seeing it finally unfold that it's not working.
Elder, you want to start us off, sir?
Yes.
Well, let's look at why things are not working.
Okay.
First of all, when we begin to deal with Egypt,
Okay.
right? If we're trying to join and connect modern Egypt with ancient Egypt, the people who rule Egypt today are not the people who once inhabited Egypt. So it's a takeover of a land, right, from an outside force, right, that is causing the conflict. Really, when you begin to look at it.
Okay.
As the regimes that have taken over from, the Islamic regimes that have taken over, right? They came there with an agenda, and the agenda, today is really causing their downfall. Their agenda, was to establish Islam.
Would that agenda would be in part to protect Israel also? Because if you destabilize Egypt, then Israel now becomes shaky.
Well,
Because the people, they had signs claiming, Obama, we don't want your puppet.
okay.
And then there's rumors that the Muslim Brotherhood was funded by the CIA and British intelligence. So, I would agree with you. I would definitely agree.
And definitely, when we begin to look at this, even with that, we're talking about Obama and America.
Right.
See, all of this is really dealing with the concept of modernized thought and the religious thoughts of our day,
Okay.
lacking the true elements of understanding and historical factors that needs to be addressed and brought to enlightenment, so that the world, as the world is looking at this whole situation, that there's some implications that we need to go back over to understand what the whole problem is existing in that territory throughout the Middle East.
But Elder, would you say that the people, because a lot of them, they didn't want to go to a harsh law as far as Sharia law. Sharia law is very, I would say it would be equivalent to the Levitical laws, the hardcore Levitical laws of the Torah, Tanakh. And then people, I guess living in more modern times would be like, those are kind of harsh. What would you say to that, Elder?
First, one of the things that we needed to look at, and when we go back to talking, Islam within itself,
Okay.
and its structuring, how it came about to become a third world religion. It's to be, you know, the controllers of the third world religion.
Okay.
And so you have to go back to its root.
Right.
What caused the situation to be as it is today? We have to go back to the founder of Islam.
Okay.
Okay, recognizing and realizing where he came from and what the purpose of him even moving from what we call Mecca
Right.
to Medina. And he came as a peace bringer, okay, to try to join the friction that was going on in that territory at the time, where there were, you talked about Hebrew, there were tribes that were there, right? And you had conflict going on there, right, where two tribes were fighting, two Arab tribes were fighting,
Right.
and you had two Hebrew tribes on one side and another Hebrew tribe on the other side, okay? And Muhammad was he was summoned to Medina, right, to try to bring peace to the unstable situation.
That's right.
So when we talk about the term peace, which always puzzled me, when we talk about Islam, we talk about it being a religion of peace.
Right.
But yet, from its onslaught, it was something that was brought about holding of the sword
Right.
to spread its message,
To conquer. Right.
to conquer.
Right.
And so when I look at it, I'm saying, well, peace, war,
Right.
peace, war. Something wrong with this element. Okay? Now, if we're trying to advocate, like today, the discussion is, particularly today, is to bring peace in the Middle East.
Right.
But you can't deal with the peace until you deal with what went wrong.
Okay. Get in.
Thank you again for allowing me to speak briefly on this topic, because you spoke of Hosni Mubarak.
Right.
And of course we know the Egyptian uprising that we saw at him being at the helm. And the young people were simply saying, you are a puppet of America. And as being a puppet of America, he came in poor and left one of the wealthiest of all.
Right.
Well, how do you govern a poor populace, and yet you become wealthy, and the rich keep getting richer, and the poor getting poorer? So then you brought in Muhammad Morsi.
Yeah. A year later.
A year later, another puppet of America, and the youth once again. Because before then, I believe they had instituted one of the military guys.
Yeah, I can't recall
his name, right? But we know. But so what we've seen is a succession of leaders that the people have rejected, because they know at the end of the day they are still vying for the power elite, and ultimately want to utilize the resources and the people for the oligarchy of America and European power moguls.
Don't forget Israel.
Absolutely, which is another tool.
Right.
So when we talk about Sharia law, obviously for those of us who've done any amount of research know that Islam and Judaism, Islam came out of Judaism. That's because true. It was the last culture to be developed and to be given the name. And so I have a very close affinity to Islam. But to your point, as a theocracy in a time of democratic rule,
right,
what you have is a conflict of governmental structures and philosophies.
Yeah.
So under the hand of Islam, you're going to have basically a theocratic dictatorship.
Yes.
It's the same way you're going to have under Judaism. There's going to be a king. The king is going to get his message from the Creator, and it's supposed to be a divine headship that gives our people order and guidance. So in Islam, it's the same thing. So when you have corporate entities and interests who are, their main focus is to control the resources of the world, and through those control mechanisms, the female is the number one tool for the predator that is capitalism, i.e. white supremacy in these regions. Sharia law becomes the enemy because under the Muslim manifesto, the woman is revered and given a position of virtue and respectability, because she's not allowed to dress, act, or out of order.
So then did the Egyptians purge the female vote?
Well, the Egyptians, the youth now, the children see that the vote is a fix. The vote is a joke. The vote ushers in, because remember, in one of the African countries, they voted in, like you said, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Al-Qaeda. They talked about Al-Qaeda, but it was in Iran or one of these countries where the people voted in what the American government says were revolutionaries and people who they couldn't control, and after they voted them in, they still would not respect their party. I can't think of
much like I think is I want to say the guy that succeeded Chavez.
Exactly, in Venezuela.
Venezuela, yeah.
So here you have a political party.
Maduro.
You have a political party that uses the democratic process, comes into power through the popular vote, and then the oligarchy says, we can't control these people, so we're not going to respect their vote. So the children in Egypt, the children in Arabia, children in America are realizing that these structures that have been set up and the political process that is supposed to govern those structures is nothing but a sham. It is a front for gangster political moves that only controlled by money, power, and influence. These white folks are not going to give up their power. And when you talk about Sharia law, you then began to discuss a higher power other than man's missiles, his ability to control through political imagery.
So I
talk about an ancient culture.
Okay, so I take it you agree with it.
I would agree that it would be a better alternative than capitalism.
Okay. Well, capitalism is the economical structure. So
Certainly.
you say it would be better than a democracy.
It would be better than a democracy, because at the end of the day, we don't have democracy. What we have is a political structure that gives the image of equality, but as you know and I know, the power elite control the political structure, i.e. Bush, Gore. Need I say more? Gore won the popular vote, but who did we get 8 years of?
Bush.
The big money, big daddy Bushes. 8th generation all men, and they made more money while they were in political office than any other presidency since then. And they have fed their minions in Egypt, in Libya, in all these countries around there where they have their jackals that go in. They wrest control from the people and give it to the power elite.
But I want to say something that you just said, Gideon. I want to make a comment to it. You say that Muhammad Morsi was a puppet.
Right.
So apparently, I guess the Muslim Brotherhood was a puppet.
Right.
So they're trying to invent Shiria Law, which is, I guess, the American agenda.
Well, they're saying now Sharia law in its purest state is an agenda for the indigenous people that have practiced Islam for their culture since its inception, as Elder said when.
But Egypt wasn't an Islamic country from the go. So how isn't that an interruption?
That's what I was saying earlier. See, what has happened in that area is that the influence of Islam that has preeminated throughout that area, throughout Egypt, throughout Iran, Iraq, and all these other territories. It would be best that we look at the ascension of history and how things got to where they are. And I go back to thinking about, I think about my Creator, okay? And I think about the instruction that he gave, which in this week's Sidra, any congregation that you usually go to would be dealing with shotim, means judgment or judges, the setting up of order, of leadership, and who's who and who's where, and whose responsibility.
Right.
Okay, so we have within our instruction is the Torah, and then the Torah says with this particular time that there was judges set up and offices to govern how the children of Israel at that time were going to go into their land and what would keep them safe from deviating and getting turned off and following instruction that says, thou shalt not add to my word or take away from. So, in the whole spectrum of things, if we go back to Abraham, which all three religions,
Right.
monotheistic religions claim ascent from,
Exactly.
right? If we went back to Abraham, we have to look at, well, what was the Abraham about, and what was the things that were introduced through him, right? In terms of peaceful solutions, love and familyness. These things were taught, okay, so that whoever came from under that instruction were to be thinking about peaceful solutions.
That's right.
But Prince, don't you, you say don't add or take away, so once you become conquered, your language becomes conquered. And so therefore your script becomes conquered. So add and take away, once you translate, you're taking and adding away,
Well,
aren't you?
that is why you have to, in other words, you study the language. Right?
Okay.
When you go back to studying the language, certain words denote certain things. Peaceful things. Like we talk many times in our instruction today about our culture and the way we live. We talk about Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And we are one with him, all right, in understanding and trying to deliver a message of peace and unity, all right, amongst nations. And
Right, and amongst nations. So while, let's just say we're taking the Hebrew Israelites, and while we're learning the language, you have atheist nations like China going ahead and taking resources like uranium and going ahead and making bombs like North Korea, South Korea, and we're sitting up here translating languages. So,
see, when I come to look at that, it's like this.
Okay.
The Creator introduced himself to the children of Israel. And he introduced himself to the children of Israel in a sense of power, broadening power. He was his force within itself could destroy the earth if he wanted to overnight.
Sure.
Sound like a white man.
So, true, but you got to understand that he also, the white man, as you say, right, deems himself trying to make himself be a power, or basically saying he's God.
Exactly.
Okay, so
But let me argue in their sense, as far as it's hard to, people like myself, convince me of a theocratic form of government when nations now, they define themselves by how many nuclear weapons you have. So that's why you have Iran, you have Russia, you have these the big nations calling the shots, and you have people
Korea.
like Gaza, much like the Hebrew Israelites, that have no nuclear weapons. So it's like nationhood is looked at as by how many weapons you have.
That's one of the things that you have to look at, the magnitude of the Creator's power. Okay, the Creator can take your mind and have you blow your own self up.
Okay.
True that.
Okay, so that kind of power, right, is what they should be worried about. Okay, to say, well, okay, we're building these bombs, we're planning on dropping them somewhere to gain territory or to control territory. Now, as they're building, okay, and the Creator decides, well, hey, look, let me just take this crazy guy and make him press a button.
Okay.
All right? And he pressing the button and end up blowing up his territory.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the buttons that are being pressed are not on any of the so-called evil people. They're being, like, let's just take the drones. They're bombing third world countries, mostly religious countries. Gaza. I don't see any people. You got Kim Jong-un talking about, yeah, we got nuclear weapons, and we're gonna bomb America. We're gonna bomb Los Angeles and New York, and I don't see nobody putting a bomb on them. I'm just saying.
Well,
So
see,
it seems like
looking at the picture,
Huh?
okay, it looks kind of,
it looks bad.
it looks bad.
Yeah, it looks bad.
But in the bottom line, going back to the instruction given by the Creator, okay, he made certain conditions and certain commitments.
So the
that-
conditions, the poor people get bombed and the rich people
No, the
keep
poor
on getting
people,
rich.
if the poor people recognize who they were and why they're in the poor condition, right, and return to do what the Creator asked them to do.
But they've been doing what the Creator asked them to do
No.
for thousands of years.
No,
Okay,
obviously.
Prince,
they
it's
haven't.
hard for me to believe that you have people that are just outright atheists that don't believe in it, and they having a good time.
Well,
And then you have people believing, like you and Gideon, they struggling, praying, and y'all just
let me ask you this.
y'all suffering.
Many questions times, right? Explain why your lungs and not your heart is taken in the air.
The elements that came together. We have to go into biology. I can't explain it on
Let's go into biology.
Okay,
All right.
on biology.
There's a function created in every life form on this planet. And each of them have a description on how they function and how they're able to live and survive, right? But it had to be some sort of plan for this to be. It ain't something that's, with illusions that they try to feed in your mind.
So what? Okay, why is it that all the religious life forms are oppressed and poor, and the atheist life forms are, prosperous in their technology and wealth? And I'm just trying to figure this thing out.
Well, let's take it. Let's take it for what it is.
All right.
The wealth that we're talking about is really the worship of
Nuclear weapons.
substance and,
Yes.
and things that have taken you away from being connected or understanding that these have become gods to us.
Exactly.
And to those idols to these people. And they're relying on that because that's their source of energy. That's their source of direction.
Some people say it be a source of protection,
Or even protection. Okay?
Right.
But what we have to begin to realize, as far as I'm concerned anyway, that there was an instruction given that said to me and to my family and to my nation, right? There's some things that I want you to do. There's some things I want you to stay in contact with so that you recognize me, okay, and that I'm omnipresent and I ain't, disappear.
Yeah, but I just find it odd, like places like, and you can jump in, get in, places like Israel, they'll make a decree saying, you know what, Palestinians, that fountain over there, yes, God blessed us with that, so you can't go over there. And let me bring it home, because some people, they can't relate to Gaza. There was a case, mother and father of a boy named Trayvon Martin, and when the boy got shot, the mother said, we're going to leave it in God's hands. Now, I remember when George Zimmerman got out, he went on Sean Hannity and he said, you know what? It was in God's will what happened.
Exactly.
So I'm just saying, it looks bad. Gideon?
Well, in reference, let me just go back to what the elder was saying about
Okay.
Egypt and the imposters that are there.
Okay.
Because when we go to look at Egypt and as the elder said, you have to go back to the root, the origins, the beginnings to find out. And Camp David Accords, the last true Egyptian monarch, leader, was, his name escapes me right now, but it was during Jimmy Carter's administration. And they had
Sadat.
Anwar Sadat.
Yes.
And they shot him in broad daylight during a parade.
Right.
Killed him in front of everybody.
Much like the guy in Dubai.
Exactly.
They
Much
took
like
out,
the
right.
President Kennedy here. Shot him live and in living color on broad daylight. And they still trying to claim they ain't found the folks who really did it.
Right. You didn't see that.
Right. So the point is, when you look at our condition and the circumstances related to Shiria Law, Judaism, these cultures, see, we give them these labels. Man does. The Creator does not think after the order of man. So when you label yourself an atheist, I label myself a Hebrew, the elder labels himself an Israelite, whatever. Those names don't mean diddly to the Creator of all things. He looks at what's in your heart. That's why our people who didn't even know the Creator when we were in Egypt the first time, they didn't even know there was a God. He said, but I have heard your cry, I am come down. Go
Okay,
ahead.
and Gideon, I understand that. Now, Elder made a good point. No, it makes a point. He said, we have to turn back to the will of the Creator. But every time
Right.
we read the script, we all get in different interpretations.
Well, see, and you made
Because
another.
when I see the book, I see murder and rape.
It is true,
And
and it
God
is
say,
there.
But you also see.
I'm seeing that He rewards the wicked.
Certainly.
You also see that is an instruction given with that.
There are
Right,
instructions.
take over the
He
land.
said,
in
no,
my
he
name.
said, if I give you, okay, I made a promise,
Okay.
right? I made a promise to Abraham, okay? And I've said, I'm making this promise to Abraham, and I'm giving him this territory. But I'm giving him this territory because the nations that are in that territory are violating principles that sustain life.
Exactly.
So wait a
Okay?
minute.
So now, by doing so, right, these nations are they're spewing themselves out by the way they are living.
Right.
Okay, so now the Creator is introduced a new program. He said, look, I done brought you all out of Egypt. So let me give you a new set of rules, a new set of understanding, so that you know me first. I'm going to introduce you to. I'm going to introduce myself to you. So he says, Moshe, go tell Pharaoh to let his son go out of the land, and that they may acknowledge
Come and worship him.
worship him in freedom,
Exactly.
in free will.
Okay, Gideon, Elder, I'm having a hard time here. So what did he do that was so spectacular? I mean, because you talk about
What
these
did he
leaders
do?
being humble and turning the other cheek, and I'm just like, man, really?
Well, what
We
he
don't-
did, let me say this, Elder, briefly.
Okay.
What he did was allow us to exist. See, this is the thing, when you come to America, and we are here now, and the misidentification of our people is central to us having knowledge of self, and it has nothing to do with being an atheist or whatever. The first contract you sign with this country is called a birth certificate.
That's true.
Your birth certificate may say colored. His birth certificate may say black. Mine says Negro.
You're saying nigger.
There is no other race on the planet whose identity has changed. Only one. And it connects
That's
us.
not true, Gideon. What about the Mexicans?
Mexicans have not changed their identity. You're
Yes,
talking
they have.
about the Incas, the Aztecs.
They don't call them Incas and Aztecs.
Well, right. That's who they derived from, though.
Right, but they'll deny it. I mean, there was a guy back home we called Apache. Look,
Well, that's
just
an
like
Indian,
an Apache. Look,
well,
no,
that's an
I'm
Indian
Mexican.
tribe that's known
But he denied it.
for their
He
existence.
denied after
See-
he said, I'm
see-
Mexican, but Mexicans
You
didn't
see, one of the
exist
things
before.
one of the things we need to look at, what is so important, is
Okay.
identity.
Right.
Okay. And when we begin to look at the identity of nations, there were 70 nations.
Right.
Okay, and those nations spread out, and you got offsprings from those nations. But originally it was these 70 nations, and their conduct and their lifestyle, and the way they practice honoring what they term their gods.
Right.
But elder, our ancestors. I'm just going to use the ancestors of the Hebrew Israelites.
Right.
The Hebrew Israelites are a conglomerate of different tribes that fought.
Absolutely.
And then the dominant tribe became that nation.
No.
No? Okay, well, let's look at China. China is a conglomerate of different nations. It started off as different provinces, but eventually General Qin brought it all together. You still got Mandarin to this day that don't want to speak, I'm sorry, Mandarin yet. You got people.
There's still confusion there. Why?
Right. So,
Okay.
right, and I'm just kind of answering what Gideon was saying about identity. You still have, at the end of the day, you have merging little nations becoming big nations. Like I said, China was once provinces.
Well, see, when you dealt with China, first of all,
You dealt with a bunch of ethnic
Tribalism.
Right.
tribalism,
yes,
but
right.
you got to understand how that came about, and that's why I usually say, well, we need to go back into the history and find out who came from where and what came from what.
Right.
Okay. So now we have a little record. The record talks about Noah and his 3 sons.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Saying that they, from that point all mankind became, started deriving from one family. All right? This family began to break off into different, different directions and began taking on traditions that they've developed and codified themselves as being tribal nation.
Exactly.
Now, if we go to deal with China, we talk about Mongols.
Yeah, Mongols,
Okay.
Cantonese, right?
We talk about Genghis
Taiwanese.
Khan.
Yeah.
When we go to deal with Genghis Khan, when the Khans came to China, there was already some people there.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Right.
All right, the scripture refers to them as being Japhetians, children of Japhet.
Okay.
Okay.
So when the Mongol Empire came to China, they took over because they were the dominant force. It was still coming with the sword to conquer, as opposed to protecting yourself and living where the Creator had given you territory to be.
Exactly.
Okay? Now, I do a lot of research, okay? So I trace the Chinese back to the children of Moab
Okay.
through study,
Right.
okay? And it talks about them separating and going into China, right? And how they hailed and became who they were. So now, we look back today, and we look at a situation what they call Mongolian,
Yes.
what they call it, what's the word for it? Mongolian idiots, that's what they used to call it,
Okay.
right?
You mean the Mongoloids, the people that have the deficiency and genetic deficiency?
Genetic deficiency.
Right.
Okay, that's
Now-
Mongoloidism.
So if we go back to our understanding,
Albinoism.
right? We go back to our understanding. We go back to Noah, right? From my perspective, we go back to Noah. Noah had 3 sons, and we begin to deal with from down to Abraham, and we talk about Lot.
Right.
The story talks about them intermingling with one another, or not supposedly sleeping with his daughters, right? Which was considered incest, and incest has defects that are required after a certain time. And if you study the scriptures, it talks about activity of what you do goes for 3 or 4 generations, that for those that hate the Creator, certain things will begin to happen. And when you acknowledge that, you begin to see that going back to the same story of Abraham, which there's a lot of information there that people just overlook.
But don't we get in? Don't
Yes,
we
sir.
harm ourselves by, like right now, they're pretty much eradicating Islam in China. They have made it. They basically outlawed it.
Right.
In this country right here, I want to say about a month ago, we just passed in our Senate what they call the Endless War Act, which is a covert war against Islam.
The investigation found problems in the models we used to predict the aerodynamic characteristics of the rocket fan. The Pegasus.
I mean,
Well, China it lets you know the symbol of their nationhood is the dragon.
yes, the dragon.
And so we know
what's wrong with the dragon?
it becomes a symbol of conquest.
What's wrong with that?
And of course, we know the conquering nations, whether it's under the Mongolians conquering areas that were not theirs,
But then
whether it's
y'all-
the Christian Crusades.
But then y'all go tell Zol and
Well, he
them to go
absolutely
conquer?
did.
Okay, so aren't we being
He
hypocritical?
told our forefathers to go into Canaan
And conquer.
And conquer.
So what's wrong when the Chinese do it?
Mind you, you have to go back to the story of Abraham, as far as I know.
Certainly.
Okay. And if you go to deal in that territory from Noah to Abraham, you're beginning to see how these nations broke off. And the activity, because everyone, understood they had a relationship with the Creator. Creator, from the beginning, had introduced himself to the first man or the first species that were here.
But Elder, you got to understand, human nature. I'm having a hard time. It's okay for y'all to conquer because y'all believe in Yah.
No.
But when we want to conquer, is a problem.
No,
We're of
I'm not saying
Satan.
that.
We're of.
But that's an
we're not
excellent
holy.
observation on your part as a non-believer, because you do have to rationalize these concepts when we see in the biblical context the Creator giving us the
Right.
motivation to go take these lands.
Yes.
And then you have a Zimmerman who would make a statement like it was God's will that I killed this
Yes.
young man, which ultimately is true, but that doesn't make it right in the context of the law
But God
and the
said it.
situations that were going on. But that loss of life, it brought about a larger awareness in the community that helps to trigger other mechanisms
Like-
for our deliverance and for our acknowledging our knowledge of self and for our acknowledgement of this system
Like
of
Marissa
white
Alexander.
supremacy and how it is directed against us. See, the blood of the saints don't go down in vain. These deaths are signals for us. So when we talk about impersonation, one nation coming in, conquering another, when we talk about Egypt, whether it was in ancient times where they worshiped all of their deities and our forefathers had to go in there and through demonstrations of power, we showed that those gods that you represent are not all powerful. They are fictitious. And that's the same thing that we're going to say here. It's not about whether you really see it. There was a mixed multitude that came out of Egypt.
I agree.
Even in the present day upheaval in Egypt, it was a mixed multitude. So what are they fighting against? They're fighting against capitalism, imperialism, and the right to determine their own destiny in their own countries.
Yeah, but when you leave a people to their own destiny, they want to put their destiny on other people.
They want
And
to
that's
take
the
other
problem.
people's land, and so at the end of the day, in an atheistic environment, you have to parallel what they would do in retrospect to a theocratic environment, because under these theocratic governments that claim to believe in some deity, we're seeing the loss of life. And if it were atheism, we would also see loss of life, because you still have the same motivating principles as Prince was talking about. That's conquering of land and people wanting to take control of resources for their own development. And over the course of history, that has caused wars and infighting. And then also he mentioned about what we haven't really studied. We say that incest, inbreeding,
Right.
promotes genetic abnormalities. And that's what he's saying. All of the ancestral inbreeding has ultimately culminated into a race of people that are fighting within themselves because they have genetically dumbed themselves down, and the diseases associated with incest are being made manifested in the wars and all of the destruction that's been in there. And Sharia law, you're saying that they don't want it in that region. However, that is the antithesis of capitalism and the control oligarchy that are in the power elite in this country and around the world.
In the instruction that I hail to, right, is the Creator has left us with an understanding, and that understanding is that you pay attention to the fear of Him in terms of the instruction that He gave you, that it was for life. Okay, when we talk about the Torah, we're talking about an instruction of life.
Exactly.
All right, how to live right in harmony, how to live right with love, how to live with communication.
So then why not work with the nations like America?
But see,
Work
now,
with
Elder,
the
you have to
nations.
mention
Right.
now, even when we in the land, Yah told us, He said, when this land becomes too straight for you, what did He say we're going to do? We were going to take other people's land. He was going to give it to us. So, as an outsider,
See, that doesn't make no sense to me, right?
You
Saying,
know,
everything that's
But
just like
he
when
tells us, see,
the story of Job. It makes no sense.
why?
Well, the Job
Because-
story makes sense, but that doesn't relate to the point that I was making about Yah told us that when we go in the land and we have children, that when that land becomes too straight or
Conquer another land.
we take other lands.
Okay, so
But we weren't told to take, see, there's a concept here that we're dwelling on
Okay.
that's allowing other thoughts to come in. If you speak with the words that where it talks about that the Creator handed us an instruction. The instruction was to take this land. He said, Moses, take off your shoes, right? He talked to Abraham, right? And he had already explained to Abraham, right, the land that he was promising unto his seed.
Right.
Okay. Now, he didn't tell him to conquer the land, other than the fact that when they went to approach the land, they were told to go to whatever land that they were going to, and the first thing they come to that land was with peace.
Sure.
Okay, so you're
Now-
saying come with peace and work with the other nations. So what I'm saying to you,
As they allow you to do
do
so.
so.
Like you said, the first thing was to come with peace. But then when our ancestors went into the land the first time, the spies that were sent into the land came back with a lie. They said there are giants in the land, which was true. But they brought grapes and stuff, but they said, how can we go in and fight against?
why do they want to fight? Why can't they, like Prince is saying, just come in peace? I mean, because really both sides, see, because the atheists, we live in fear of a theocracy.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? When we look at y'all look crazy to us.
Right.
Y'all look like, y'all cutting the heads off people
Sure.
in the name of God, and then God's talking to you and we don't hear him. You know what I'm saying? And it's just a form of behavior modification. And so we're saying that we can live in peace,
Right.
but when y'all start to smell yourselves,
Right.
y'all want to take us out.
Right.
And so
No,
as
I'm
a
not-
as a defense mechanism, we feel like we got to take y'all out first. That's why we're
Well,
eradicating
listen.
your brothers, the Muslims.
The Torah,
in China.
the Torah in itself is not to wanting the desire to destroy,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's to destroy the element in the mindset of the people.
Behavior
of
modification.
worshiping. Right.
Certainly.
Right, but you
now-
got scientists saying that, you know what, the way y'all doing it is wrong.
Right.
And so we're not going to give up. You know,
Okay.
you got two sides of the brain.
Right.
Definitely.
And I think the atheists, we're operating more on the left side. You guys are operating more on the right side. And what we're saying is that, okay, that is your opinion.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Look at us. We have technology. We have science. We have medication. We have a smooth running government. We have infrastructure. What do y'all have? Y'all have mules. Y'all have deserts. You know what I'm saying? So we look kind of, y'all, it's kind of hard to convince us.
What land that you can tell me of that's running, right, that's not having those same problems that universally?
Well, I think universally we are having the same problems, the same type of crimes. However,
Exactly.
certain lands have more to offer than other lands. Like China now China is polluted.
Thank you.
It is,
Totally.
but China has a foot on the stage of offering things to the outside world, whereas Gaza doesn't.
Well, let me speak on the development issue briefly.
Okay, right. It's
Because
right.
see, when we talk about the term D denotes that something was and it has been deranged or rearranged. So you have to look up the etymology of the term itself. So when we talk about development, the electronic and technological age is predicated upon one thing: plastic.
Okay.
Plastic is a non-renewable. You can recycle it,
Yeah.
but it's a non-renewable product because there's only a limited amount of carbon, petroleum in the earth that they can extract out of the earth's anatomy.
Okay.
It was a reason why it was in the earth's anatomy from the original point of design. It wasn't for man to come and extract it out because the creator, what says it is like we just talked about on the show earlier, fracking. Fracking
Okay.
is where power companies go to certain areas. They use hydraulic drills, drill down into earth, and then explode bombs after they set a device over that area to shake loose for natural gas.
Now, Gideon, as a human being,
Right.
I agree with you, but let's look at the Earth before there was life. It was radiation.
There was radiation,
There was
but life
thousands of
was not
years.
being damaged by it. But what I was mentioning
No, there was
about
no life to begin with.
Well, there's always been life. There's spirit life, and there's natural
Oh,
life.
Gideon, come on now. what I'm saying is that the fracking will eventually produce an atmosphere where the Earth will go back into this radiated state.
Absolutely.
this.
And not only that, it is destroying. The earth is a living organism. That's what the scientists who's supposed to be so intelligent, and for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. So if there's a cavern in the anatomy of the earth that held gas, which they use for natural gas, and you extract it and then explode bombs, as a result of that you have earthquakes and sinkholes. We just have a new sinkhole on Fulton Industrial Boulevard. So what happened is when you see the evidence of capitalism and their type of resource gathering, if it's destructive to the planet, destroying the water and the air, why would you support that? When we look from a biblical perspective, we're looking to live in harmony.
Wait a minute. You know how many trees you got to chop down to get these Bibles in circulation? How much ink you got to print? So I don't, come on, Gideon.
We do agree that the Bible has paper.
Right, you know how many trees and died for that?
Trees, and
the
it
Word
comes
of God.
from trees. But what I think that we fail to look at is that there's a code of instruction if we went back to the understanding of the scriptures. Okay? It said God created man.
You're right.
Okay, now I
Right.
got to stop you right there, Heather. Which man? What species of man?
What
Now
species
science
of
has
man?
shown
It's
that
the spirit
different-
man and then it's the natural
A man.
No, when I
God-
say man-
a species of man at the time that he was created, that it was just man and it wasn't a female. So, in this, if we just allow our minds.
So you must have been talking about this bacteria form of the amoeba, because every species after that
I'm
created
preaching-
male and female.
I'm talking
Darwin
about,
ain't up in here, man. We ain't going
No, Gideon.
I'm talking about a human being,
Right, okay.
a male human being.
Male human being.
And according to his instruction, according to the teaching of instruction, beginning in the book of Bereshit, which meant generally
Genesis.
the book of generations, right? And how life emanated from that perspective of being guided and instructed by the Creator.
So this man was reading and writing.
Well, the man wasn't reading and writing
Okay.
in that sense of the word, but he was
Okay.
listening.
Oh, so he was listening.
So
okay.
he according to the readings
Right.
of what we call scriptures, all right.
See that?
I know it throws you off a little bit. I
It
understand.
throws me off, because I
But
look at us
I
as
just want to look at
Okay.
something that I always keep saying to
Okay.
us, right? We were created, we have limbs, we have mind, we have things that are organized, right? Like something had to organize it. Right now, the computer and everything they do now is trying to emanate you,
right.
all right? But this
Imitate.
created or imitate you.
Okay.
This creation that the Creator created, all right, is sound. You understand? It has never left its function. Okay. So now,
Or his original design.
So now, when he drawed from the design, right, he saw in certain aspects that he divided one from the other. He made a female as opposed to the male.
Right.
Right.
And they, in turn, were to bring forth life and, pursue it according to its instruction from the scriptures.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, we can get off from it, say it doesn't exist. But then,
Well,
how
no,
do we
no,
explain?
What's the alternative?
How do we
Well, no.
explain? How do we explain this? Okay, you're created with a penis.
Right.
She's created with a vagina.
Right.
Right.
Both of these activities or the relationship to this, one is connected. It joins together to bring the two parties together
No,
to be
I-
one again.
And I totally agree with the religions. with
Who made
all
that design?
religions.
It came through the Big Bang.
Elements.
The elements just
That's
came
why.
together
No, but
after
I
the bang.
agree with the
The elements banged and then they start banging.
Or the
I mean, it's the same
elements-
way you get mold on the bread.
the
It just comes
elements-
about.
The elements just came about.
It's just like, mold. Mold just
you're-
comes about.
But
it's a
but
spore
see-
though there that you
yeah.
just don't see.
Why is it
Right.
that your feet, right, are not combing your hair, or You know, that's a bad analogy.
Well, it's intelligent
I'm saying-
No, it's
what I'm
good. It's a
saying
good
to you
point.
is
Well-
there's something
Okay.
that tells you that there had to be a higher source of intelligence
Right. And
To organize.
to
and
organize.
at the end of the day, right.
and engineer this thing we call the human body.
Right. And at the end of the day, we're using our minds to figure it out.
Certainly.
I don't think there was God that talked to Moses, or I don't even think those people exist.
But which came first?
Okay,
the
but-
mind of the body.
I don't know, Gideon. But neither does the scriptures.
Well,
Well,
yes,
it
the
has
scriptures
some
Neither
are-
does the
perspective.
Quran. But no, but what I'm saying, because
The scriptures
I don't
has.
acknowledge those books, because I just asked you what species of human was Adam and Eve.
What-
You know, you got 24. We're the 24th
Homo sapiens.
species,
I'll
right?
tell
of
you what
human.
Right.
Right. The
Evolution.
first being Homo erectus.
the
Okay.
species of the earth.
That's only if we believe, okay?
Right.
That's only if we believe the Darwinists or the evolutionary
evolution at
Cro-Magnon
some-
man, prehistoric
I'm
man,
only-
Homo erectus. This is the evolutionary process that they came up with after Darwin developed
Darwin,
his
I'm not
theory
talking
of
about-
evolution.
I'm not talking about Darwin. I'm talking about black
You're
African
talking about-
archaeologists like Shenket the Diop, who is a black
Okay.
African, by the way.
Okay,
All
right, right.
I'm not talking about Darwin.
But
Okay.
did he
Darwin's-
explain?
they copied the
did he-
Africans.
Did he
Right.
explain? Did he explain why you have a brain in your head and not in your foot?
No, he explained the migration of the different races.
Okay,
He-
and if you deal with anthropology or archaeology,
Right.
you begin to try to develop things, but a solution to what you're viewing, but you aren't describing the function. Why does?
Right, but I
Why
see
do-
where you guys
why-
are coming from. That's a religious tactic.
Well, it's
I'm
an
not
intelligent
saying-
design
Right,
versus
it's-
the
it's-
Big
Right,
Bang.
but when you apply things to real life,
Right.
the human mind is the greatest resource of the human mind is this independent thought.
Okay.
And so, man, the Homo sapiens,
Yes.
are waking up and they're saying, you know what, we're learning at a fast, accelerated rate.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, the atheists are saying, man wrote that.
Certainly.
But the
You know what I'm saying? The same things that apply today, the same things that applied back then, except we are more advanced today. So it sounds like a convincing tactic to us. Like I've heard what you're saying, Prince, 1,000 times. I've heard
Sure.
Gideon
Sure.
1,000 times. I've heard it in Islam. I've heard it in Judaism. What I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying is that we have to sit down at the table as atheists, as Hebrew Israelites.
Which is what we're doing.
And come up with a solution for Egypt, because it's bound to happen here.
Yes.
Once the people wake up here, see, for some reason the Arab, they wake up just like that. But I guess because we got popcorn and microwave, we just take our time and
The Arabs still
Oh,
have
Arab-
their
uprising.
family intact. See, when you talk about this issue of first of all, let's go back to genetic superiority. Then once we go back to the genes, and as the elder was talking about, then we
Okay.
can begin to decide and determine why and how intelligent design came about. Because see, I asked you a question. I said, which came first, the body or the mind?
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. Since y'all want to be trivial, there's a bird called, once upon a time, called the dodo bird.
Yes, it's extinct now.
It's extinct now.
Prehistoric bird.
But at the time, the bird would go in other birds' nests and lay one egg.
In that nest and
Right.
have a surrogate parent take
Surrogate
There
parent,
are
right.
birds that still do that
Right,
today.
and that bird that was born, he would take his foster brothers and sisters and
And
throw them
throw
out.
them out.
So
'cause-
why would God or create such a being like that?
Well, you have to remember there's duality in all things. And Elder, excuse me, I'm going to be short.
And I'm gonna ask another question,
There's
too.
yin and yang.
Right.
There's good and there's evil. You
Okay.
can't have one without the other. I know we're getting down to the end of the
Oh,
show.
okay, wow.
So the duality is there, so there will maintain balance, and that balance brings about a cosmic uniformity that we see. The planetary situation create law, so you don't get law and balance and order out of a big bang. You
Okay,
don't.
well, I'm gonna ask a closing question for both of y'all. I've always wanted to ask this question. You got Yahshua,
Yes.
the Son of God, right? Son of
Wow.
God.
Well, teach.
You know, he raised Lazarus from the dead,
That's right.
and he healed other people, supposedly, right?
Yes.
So he could raise people from the dead, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when John the Baptist got beheaded, why he didn't bring him back to life?
Because John the Baptist and many other saints, Their blood had to be shed for the purpose of acknowledging the true Messiah and the work that he had to do. And what was John's?
So now why don't let all
what
the-
was his crime? He told King Herod that it was not right for him to have his brother's wife.
It shouldn't matter.
And it wasn't Herod that pronounced that on him. It was Herod's wife through his daughter who danced in front of him. But the point, your point is, why didn't he raise him
Right,
up?
why didn't bring him
Well,
back?
he has intelligent choice as well.
All right.
I believe we have to go over this subject again.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I
we're gonna
believe
do
we
that.
got to-
Wrapping it up,
Yeah,
my
We got
brother.
to wrap
Give
it
me
up
to wrap
by
it up.
going into understanding that we are the children.
They're
All of
saying
us.
bye-bye.
All right.
Let him check it out.
All right. We'll see y'all next time. We're gonna continue this. Peace.
New deal.
Woo. We got